Awa, ko ngai tamatirangi Ngāti Hinewaetarua me Ngāti Whaitanga Hapu, ko Ngāti Kahungunu Ngā Rauru me Ngāti Raukawanga Iwi, he kaiputahi rangahau ahau, ko Kim Hamilton taku ingoa. Welcome to all and thanks for joining us this morning. I'd like to acknowledge all the community groups and NGOs throughout Aotearoa and also those from government agencies who are looking for insight to inform your work. I acknowledge those who are joining us from other countries around the world, and we appreciate that this is a time of great uncertainty and radical transformation of our people, our country, our world. And the things that Maire Kipa, Adrian Te Patu and Dr. Regan Potangaroa have to share today are very relevant to how we can work and recover through this period. Throughout the webinar, we invite you to log on to the Community Research Facebook page to post any questions for our presenters today. And if you'd like to be notified for when we are broadcasting our next webinar, please join our Facebook page and the Community Research Discussion Group. You can also subscribe to our monthly e-news by emailing communications@communityresearch.org.nz. I'd like to ask one of our presenters, Adrian Te Patu, to open our session with a karakia.
Kia ora. Nā maunga whakarakaraka tūhono mai koutou. Nā tūpuna tūtuna, ki te taha uru tu waka tapu, eitoka ahuru, eitoka marino. Whakakapa mai e koutou o koutou korua e hoka, e te ahuru, te hei mauri ora. Tuaka ki te mii atu kia koutou, o I mai nei I tēnei haia I reira tēnā no tātou katoa, me no tātou. Karori ki te atu e maungaranga ki tapatu anu ki rangi nei. Kaoro pai he rangi mani ki ngā iwi katoa mai o te arotai atu ki te o whānei. Amen. Kia ora.
Amen, kia ora. So in our webinar today, we've got a range of perspectives from the team here today who are going to reflect on whānau, Māori organisation and community recovery from both Covid-19 and the Otautahi quakes experience. The government says we're in unprecedented times or perhaps radical transformation, and we know that the economic, social, cultural, environmental recovery and resetting is both a challenge and an opportunity. Whānau are worried about basic human rights related to housing, heat, food, education and work. And our panellists will be sharing some insights and lessons we can learn from and perhaps not repeat related to the earthquake recovery. There is often othering or distancing from vulnerable whānau by society and the government in post-disaster times. We often have a lack of voice or representation across our key structures in media, government and communities. We've seen Māori and iwi communities lead and support the Wellbeing throughout Covid-19. So what do our presenters have to say about this and the government response? What are our challenges and opportunities? How can Māori epistemology or worldviews help us through this? The presenters have a view that the lifelines of whakapapa, whānau, hapu, iwi and whenua hold significance to create a framework from which to restore, revitalise and reconnect after loss, change and devastation. I'd like to introduce our presenters for today's community research webinar. We have Maire Kipa, and Maire is committed to transformational Māori leadership at governance and management, in particular as it impacts complexities associated with outcome measures. There is a time lag between intervention and result. Many variables apart from a specific intervention may impact on the outcome, and a good outcome for one group may be regarded as an unsatisfactory outcome from another group. Her voluntary interests are in iwi environmental projects, and her current research interests are in indigenous perspectives on natural disasters, risk reduction and resilience. She's currently a co-researcher with one of our other panellists, Professor Regan Potangaroa, studying Māori resilience post-disasters. Maire recently presented at the Australia-New Zealand Disasters Management Conference on the Māori dimension of disaster risk reduction and what they learned in Rapaki. We also have Dr. Regan Potangaroa, and he is Ngāti Kahungunu ki Wairarapa. He's a Professor of Architectural Science at the School of Architecture at Victoria University in Wellington, and he's been deployed over 200 times with the United Nations, the IFRC and National Societies of the Red Cross, Red Crescent, large international NGOs, governments and universities to disasters in 26 countries. He also worked in the Christchurch and Kaikoura earthquake responses. Adrian Te Patu has worked for various organisations, including government departments and agencies, community organisations, education institutions, hospitals, health providers, and also iwi. His roles have included social work, youth work, counselling, education, training, cultural supervision, health promotion, cultural advice, MC, facilitator on occasion, and apparently he's pulled the odd rabbit out of a hat. Adrian's unique perspective and effective approach has seen him work persuasively in both Māori and mainstream organisations. Adrian's a member of the Governing Council for the World Federation of Public Health Associations, and he's also co-chair Indigenous Working Group for the same organisation. Nau mai kia koutou katoa. I'd like to introduce Dr. Regan Potangaroa to kick us off, please. Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora whanau, and welcome to this webinar. And we're looking at what are the opportunities, and what's the challenges ahead. And it's a funny road that we're on, isn't it? I've been deployed over 200 times now to disaster areas, but in those disaster areas, we can normally see the disaster. The bridges are down, the buildings are down. There's people that are sick and injured all over the place. So we can see those sorts of disasters. But this one that we're dealing with, this COVID-19, is kind of hidden. It's not the same. We still have water, we still have power, all the infrastructure still works, but somehow the system is busted. And while in those normal disasters that I get deployed to throughout the world, we're trying to get the infrastructure all together, the funny thing about this one is that the infrastructure is already there. So what's missing? Well, as you already know, the thing that's missing and the thing that we're getting used to is people, is that it's the social interaction that is being damaged by COVID-19. And that's very interesting, particularly for Maori, because we aren't the normal 2.4 kids, 2.4 sort of mum and dad, 2.4 kids. We're not that sort of model or that sort of role. We're kind of much bigger. And I think that's been, for us, the big challenge about this COVID-19 was the need to break it down to such a small family unit. And so, here in the Hutt Valley, where I'm sitting at the moment, we had the interesting situation of, at least 2 of our kaumātua who decided in the middle of level 4 lockdown that they had had enough. They'd had a good life. They wanted to see the kids. They wanted to see their mokapunas around the place. And so all the families were saying, well, look, we can't. It's lockdown. It's lockdown. So in the middle of the night, they would go off and visit and see whānau members and just drop in on them during level 4. Very bad thing to do. But this has been the big challenge for us. And tangi have been the, where it's really shown up quite badly. I know that during the lockdown phase, we were at war and we needed to do something. But now that we're moving away from that, we need to expand that quite rapidly, I suspect, because that need for Māori to connect, which I think is what we all need. We all need a good hug. I had my first hug the other day on Sunday. So we all need that sort of hug. So coming from a sort of disaster background where I'm used to buildings being down, water systems, power not working, to this one that we've just come through and still coming out of, the big difference has been that social component has been missed out. And I think it's still being missed out as sort of the businesses rush in with the economic fire engine to try and put out those fires. The real fires aren't really in the economic sector. They're in the families, they're in the connections, they're in those networks that we need to sort of come together. So I'll leave it there because I know Adrian and Maire also have another take on this story, and so I'll pass over to them now.
All right, kia ora. Ko auraki tongariro mangapō hatu o Kumanga, ko Ngāti Tūwhare tō tūhoi o ku iwi. Engari, kanui te mihi, koutou katoa, tēnā koe kam mō tō karanga, kia mata, kia tātou, kanui te mihi. Thank you, Regan, for starting us off. I think that's where what I'd like to add to this is that the stories that our whānau have to tell about past situations, whether it was 100 years ago, post-war, recently with earthquakes, are a rich source of learning. And that mātauranga, that awareness is should all starts to come back and it starts to unfold. So having worked with our people and communities from the marae in Otautahi after the 2011 earthquake, we'd had the situation only 6 months or so before with the Darfield earthquake. And that was kind of a warning really, and we'd almost had a prep run, a bit like these level 4, 3, 2 alerts with the lockdown process. So coming into the second earthquake in Christchurch, I feel like our marae and our community were a little bit more prepared for what lay ahead, and how to anticipate that was something totally new for me. Living on the marae was my mum and dad as kaumātua in the kaumātua flats, and in town in the centre of Christchurch at our marae there. And so learning from how well and how quickly our iwi leaders and communities on the ground could mobilise an effort, just like we would for any community gathering that was a surprise, which generally is a tangihanga. It's not that we're unused to surprises, but we do have the, all of that within us to respond well and manaaki our whānau. So that's definitely what happened in Otautahi for that first month of the national emergency. That's where I met Regan, and he started to send out some signals about what might be coming up, and helping us to anticipate what might come not long after, when the emergency stops. And we had to think about what if marae are evacuated? What if housing is of a lot of our people is affected in certain areas, and in the eastern suburbs a lot of housing was affected. So there was a huge response to be able to help our whānau who had transport lines cut off, couldn't get access to health supplies. It was difficult, very difficult, and we had great support from whānau like our Māori wardens, iwi leaders, iwi groups coming in en masse, the Otautahi, to help out. That was fantastic, stuff that we know almost inside and out, with our hands tied behind our back. What we weren't prepared for was how long this would go on for, whether agencies understood who led emergencies and recovery, whether they actually took our culture into as a factor that was really important to us. It's not generally, or what I saw anyway in Otautahi, culture wasn't a big factor in decisions that were made in the recovery going forward. Iwi was a factor, people were a factor for sure, and understanding that they needed to consult with our people was certainly something that a lot of agencies were committed to. But with resources and pūtea, no. Nice to talk about what's up ahead, nice to plan even together with central government, local government, NGOs and community agencies. But the difference with this situation that I can see anyway is that the pūtea has the whānau need evidenced by places like Whānau Water Commissioning, where I work, places like our Māori providers offering support to address immediate needs, gathering that data from those learnings. 20,000 whānau were able to be touched really by the support of Māori community networks. And as a result of that, we have a huge amount of information to inform us going forward. Now, that meant we get more political attention, we can ask for help from our iwi leaders for the social needs, but going forward, I anticipate, as what we found in Rapaki, that culturally there are some hidden factors that we may forget in this situation. And I want us to think about the strong stand that we have taken to create a border, to say to the community, this is our place, this is how we need to protect and take care of what's within our village, within our pā, and these are the ways that we would aspire to do that. Now that's a bit of a front to the rest of the community, and it gets up people's noses But in fact, that's always how we've behaved, is to look after what is precious to us, is our taonga. And a similar thing happened in Rapaki, I feel, where although there was a very high risk situation and scientists had climbed all over the mountain that had spewed out the boulders and damaged very seriously houses in our little pa, in our little village, whānau were prepared to make a stand to say, okay, let's discuss about whether we need to leave or not. And the decisions for not leaving, irrespective of the risk and the threats that were flagged by science and technical people and government, was we have a connection here. We cannot leave in the ways that they were being asked to red zone land or to get out of houses that were deemed to be unsafe. Now, even the whānau who live on that side of our beautiful tamatea at Rapaki knew the risks of building there. And they proceeded to tell us the whakapapa and the history of what their grandparents had told them about, okay, you were allotted this side of living on the mountain. That was a rough deal. But if you do choose to live there, know that there is a risk, because they started to talk about previous events, earthquake events, maybe 200-300 years ago. So there was no lack of knowledge about risks. And I think the same is for the epidemic. There is no lack of knowledge within our own mātauraka and whakapapa for the risk that we face. And what is best to hold to is say, I know this place, I know this thing, the way that perhaps it's happened in the past, like COVID-19 is, or the Spanish epidemic flus, or disease epidemics prior to the 1918. I know there were more before that decimated our people's towns and villages as well. It wasn't just the 1918 flu. So we need to talk with the people, get on the ground and understand that whakapapa in order to inform the visioning going forward. And I suppose what I can say here most of all is that there's a lot to learn from the whānau voice and experience, whether it be 50 years old, 10 years, which is just since the earthquakes. And don't feel that because globally this is unprecedented, which actually it's not, as you've just heard, 1918 Spanish flu, that was global, but it is unprecedented for us as a community right now. And so I understand the desire for people to rush at solutions, but I hope that we can also give time and resources to our iwi leaders, to our communities and pās and marae, to uncover the mātauraka that is inherent within us, to know that whānau wellbeing is so critical, but so is the whenua, and so is our natural environment and natural world. Without those things, we will be ignored in the decisions going forward. If we don't include those things, our solutions won't be ours, they'll be other people's. So I want to just sort of finish there, let Adrian have a kōrero, and maybe we can ask each other questions, but I hope that's helpful, that whānau taking a stand and saying we're not moving, we need to be heard, whatever it takes is to stay on my whenua, to stay with my mātauraka and whakapapa is vital to visioning a future.
We have, thank you, Maire. Just before we switch over to Adrian, I'll just signal to the attendees. I have noted there's about 4 questions that are sitting here, but we'll let Adrian present and then come back to those questions. Kia ora.
Kia ora, can I just say how lovely it is? I'm actually sitting in a house at the top end of Tauranga Moana, of Taupo Moana, looking down at Mount Pihanga and Tongariro. And then, of course, on the other side, of course, is Ngaruahoe and the magnificent Ruapehu. I just thought into that. And my apologies about the light coming in behind. You know, most of the houses, that flash houses on the shoreline of Taupo, have decks on 4 sides, and so we can't block out the sun as much as we try. So we're trying to change that by putting as much artificial sunlight on my face. So Look, kia ora everyone. It's a real privilege to be part of this, and I want to acknowledge that. I'm just going to kind of talk about a couple of things that are broad and then going to bring them back in. So I might start with kind of the beginning, and I want to thank a number of our people who are saying this around the country, and that is that COVID-19 didn't cause inequity, it's exposed it for our people. What it's also done is it's also brought in a new pua, and it was my privilege to be an elected member of local government in Christchurch before the first quake and also 4 years into it. So watching some of the things that happened. And so there was a beginning of a new kind of a pua all of a sudden. Some people are already talking about that. When I say the new pua, people who've never had to necessarily struggle are joining those people who have been struggling for a long time. And a significant number of those people are ours. So I kind of don't want to throw in some too bigger stuff, but here's some interesting things to think about. So when we think about the Spanish influenza, you know, the suggestion is the conservative estimate is about that 40 million people died. Can I say that's the conservative estimate of how many people died of HIV and AIDS very recently? And I know Maire was at one of the world conversations around that in the Republic of South Africa. I'm saying that because it didn't mean as much, because most of the people who died, over 35 million of them, were black. And so, you know, and when it became more significant, it was when white people started to die in the United States and United Kingdom. And so I just want to acknowledge that, because it kind of draws us back to kind of where we fit as indigenous people, as tribal people, as families, as clans, within a country that's essentially Eurocentric, which is not a sin. But actually the things that both Regan and Maire have alluded to is the framework that's being used. It's kind of one of those big flash Eurocentric ones, which again, it's not a sin, but it's actually not as inclusive as we like to think. So one of the challenges around that is kind of, we kind of, you know, in our nation, we're kind of in the Kuru Club of Nations, you know, of the 200 countries. New Zealand is one of those top ends. We're able to do what we do because we kind of are in that. And in some ways, we're one of the smaller and poorest nations. We're like the stinkest house in the flashiest street in the world. But we play to those other rules, which also means that determines what the recovery kind of looks like, which has already been alluded to. So where's the place for Indigenous people within those? Where's the place for Indigenous Australians? Where's the place for Indigenous people from the Americas, and of course the Sami and Laplanders and people from Greenland and other places? Can I just say again, of the nearly 400 million people identify as being Indigenous, we belong to a minority group in there. We belong to those in developed countries. So the majority of Indigenous people are people who will be really struggling when they get through this. So just creating the broader context, I want to say we should not feel guilty or super grateful, but just want to acknowledge that's kind of our place. Because when the people who make the decision about what it looks like, whether it's the lockdown or otherwise, the framework has already been alluded to, it's not a Māori one, necessarily. It's kind of grabs bits of it, but it's kind of like cherry picking at the best of times. I also want to just acknowledge that, you know, our people have done exactly what we were trained to do, made anō. And so what happened in Christchurch is that, you know, iwi got together, and I want to acknowledge, as one of those people who watched nurses, watched people coming in from across the motu, and iwi was sending down resources and money to Ngāi Tahu Whānui as part of the conduit to doing that. So the Christchurch challenge, you know, people in Canterbury and people in the country, we kind of behave like we like to think we should. And this challenge, while much, much bigger, you know, it's obvious on a global scene plus that we're actually behaving like we like to think that we would, but not at the expense of where we fit. The great thing is that what our people did, and I know I'm talking to them, we all know this, what our people did is they got and were up to speed really, really quickly. Families, through change agents like arguably the most significant part of Te Ao Māori in terms of tangihanga, were compliant. Who'd have thought? And, you know, a significant tradition that we did that. And so in our own family, we buried my brother-in-law, Hairua. And so, you know, and so we did the right things. We followed the leadership. And actually, it didn't matter where you fitted in the food chain or where you fitted, whatever food group you belong to, in terms of iwitanga or across the motu, everybody clicked in. And in many ways, I think part of the outcome of the future of this is how we were able to do that and how brave we were. And it was really important that whānau Apanui and then in Wiri Whenua, they did some of those things. It was good for their souls. It also re-established who we were. But there were lots of actually wonderful stories, and I heard one only last week around what's happening in Takaha with a doctor there. They were taking lists of everybody from there, and if they left, they wanted to know where they were going, and they stopped some of them from even leaving. So, you know, that's just so we're talking about a GP practice, we're talking about iwi, we're talking about hapu, all getting together and doing those things that we know we're really good at. So, you know, those social components that people in Wellington are talking about are things that we already know. I just want to tie up some of this by acknowledging that, you know, we've always had conduits for passing on the stuff that's really important. And I won't go to it, but, you know, Viv's raised an important question. And so part of that really is the fact that even before this, with the creation advent of the wānanga that are happening by both tribal ones and the intellectual and academic institutions, a lot of the stuff has been passed on. That stuff will never, ever, ever be lost. And so wānanga, hui, tangihanga were all conduits for that. What this has done, it's provided, including Zoom, has become a new tikanga. And actually, it's a, so the last thing, our people really embraced the new world in so many ways anyway. And a small example of that is, can you imagine the conversation, the kōrero and the narrative that went on across the mutu when they started to put photographs inside the wharepuni, inside the meeting houses, instead of the whakairo? You know, all of that kind of stuff. That would have taken, so adopting and adapting is nothing new to us. So I'm not challenged about what might be lost. I'm really excited that, and as much as it's hard to say this, I'm kind of excited that the new poor are going to suddenly join the conventional poor. But what we have to offer them is not the poverty of spirit. And all the things that our people have done exactly what we were coached and trained to do. It's just really important that that conversation, that narrative, is not lost in the politicking and process that will happen in the canyons of Wellington. Now, that's the least I could talk at the moment, because, you know, otherwise I'd go on for another hour. So, kia ora tātou.
Thanks,
Can
Adrian.
I just ask, can I ask one of the questions about what a culture is a factor that I raised? And I suppose what I'm hearing, and I heard back here in Christchurch and Kaikoura, was about psychosocial wellbeing. And one of the steps that we should take to help those whānau become very anxious, concerned about the future, or very stressed and worried about the past, as in they've lost what they have lost. And that is the reality here, is that people have lost jobs or could lose jobs. The same as in the earthquakes, lost a house or could lose a house. That was still a decision yet to be made. And where culture is a factor in psychosocial wellbeing is that it's about our cultural wellbeing, not psychosocial wellbeing. So let's talk about psychosocial wellbeing. That's all good for you, whoever enjoys that study and discipline. But our wellbeing, and whether it be over anxiety, depression, stress, is about our culture. And I don't feel like I said it loud enough or strong enough in those times. It was really maybe being a little bit academic in the way that I was understanding that situation. So what we did tend to do is go back to our homes and paths and do what we always do. Talk about what was important to us. A man needing to get back into his home, but still acknowledging that a mountain that had just spewed out rocks is his personal taonga. That he has an obligation to be there. He felt connected and would have been more distressed to be off the mountain and living in town where it was nice and safe. That was his personal and whānau decision. It affected decisions about the land. He and I would love for him to tell his story, and he plans to write a book, but his decision was that we will not be told by the Crown that we should red zone and make our land zoned unsafe. And so we did things through the Māori Land Court. Thank goodness there are officials out there who understood that any touching of Māori land during a disaster, no matter what reason you'll put forward, is alienation of our land. That's illegal. So the government had forgotten those things in the disasters. So when we hold to our culture and decisions start getting made about us, without us, we can make a stand. And in many cases, we do have it's a rights, a human rights, indigenous rights case that we can make out of that, or it could be a legal case, and who we must allow ourselves to be ready and strong enough to be challenged over these things, like whether we have the right to have a blockade across their path. There was no question, it's the local, it's about rangatiratanga and whānau doing what they believe is right. So I applaud all of that. We saw a lot of that in Christchurch, and because of it, a lot more traction was made. But at least for this time round, I'd like us to talk about cultural wellbeing, not psychosocial. It doesn't mean it's only 2 words, but it's very deep and for us. Kia ora.
And I think you're right, Maire. We weren't. It wasn't that we didn't know about it at the time. We sensed it, but it took us a little bit of time to actually figure out what that meant. And it's very difficult to actually explain to someone, particularly at the strategy level, what that actually means and how to actually translate that into strategic action and plans, particularly moving forward into this recovery that we're going into. So what does it mean to be culturally sort of well-being? What does that actually mean? Well, let's get down to some of the numbers that we're looking at now. So, and let's start with the big one, the unemployment numbers. So general unemployment apparently is going to go from 4% up to 13.5, which is really, really bad. It's really high, and we haven't really been there, there before. But the Maori, and I suspect the Polynesian unemployment rate, is going to go from somewhere around about 8% to somewhere between 29.5 and 38%. So lowest level, 29.5. So what does that mean to our culture? Where does our culture fit into all of this? And what I've been finding is that at the moment, the discussions that I have with my whānau are split up into 2. There's the first discussion is, go and get some other qualification. The main thing is you've got to survive through 2020, get to the end of 2020, and then we'll see what's going to be there. So get some sort of qualification. It will then differentiate you from others. The second discussion is find some place that's got powers. Don't tell anyone, and so you've got a food supply that's going to take you through. So our culture. The cultural values that we have and that we apply, where the rubber meets the road, can be quite specific and quite definite, but never, and this is the thing that we've seen through Christchurch, through Kaikoura, never let the decision-making part leave you. You've always got to have that decision-making part, be active, advocate, and you will find that there is that culture inside of all of us, but particularly for Māori, because it's been ingrained into us. And I'm very interested in as I've probably told all of you at least, about the work that we're doing, looking at the 1918 Spanish flu impact, or Spanish flu pandemic, on Maori, which was absolutely devastating at the time. But the key finding is that we came out of it. We will survive, and we will survive this one. But with those unemployment numbers, we're going to have to hunker down, and it's going to be the social networking is going to be the key to how we're going to get through 2020 and then on to 21. Kim.
Yeah, I'd just like to pose this question. I guess it's to all of you. So what I'm seeing from a number of people, Tanya, Kelly, Neville, Viv and Holly, is really some questions that pertain to the role, I guess the challenges to achieving equity particularly in the health system. And I think it's been interesting looking at the response to the Ministry of Health Māori COVID response plan, but also related to how can we have a better social infrastructure, and you know, how can we maintain our rangatiratanga beyond the response and into the recovery kind of phase of development in Aotearoa. So 3 kind of big questions, but Adrian wants to have a go first.
Yeah, a couple of things first, you know, and I'm not coming from a medical place really, but I want to say, you know, the most important issue was containment. I'll just say it again, the most important issue was containment. I might say it again, the most important issue was containment. And so once you've got, you know, now's not necessarily the time while there's a battle plan going on, while we're in the middle of it, to necessarily right some of the wrongs of the past. They will never go away, and we will take care of those. But the immediate stuff in front is really, really important. And unfortunately, some of the processes arrested some of those issues of tikanga, and particularly the stuff around seeing people. We couldn't and we didn't, you know, and I'm saying to my family, and we were compliant. To be cheeky, you know, the biggest issue for GP practices for Māori and other Pacific people is compliance with medication more than anything. So, you know, what we did was we complied. And so we just need to do that. And once we get into this other place, then we make sure we secure these other things, which also means politicking doesn't necessarily have as much of a place where it's just for the sake of politicking. Recovery immediately is the most important thing. Containment, and then we move on. We will not. We're strong enough to be able to kind of make sure we take care of some of the things. That's just the first part of that. So I'll just pause there and.
Kia ora, Adrian. The other aspects, perhaps for me, are really in terms of investment and pūtea and resources and time, is at the grassroots with our communities that are gathering together, whether they be rangatahi, whether they be the marae, the hapori associated with the marae, the hahi, the kura. These are places to start to immediately connect and find ways to connect, whether that's online, through technology, with spacing, to start to hear and understand what is the narrative, what is the richness of their whakapapa about their tauka, about their, in order to start the kōrero on what is our future. I read an interesting article about when you're envisioning the future, your narrative or your framework is based generally on where did I grow up, who are my family, what school did I go to, what education will I have, and what vocations are available, you know, for me. That's not where we start. We start at our maunga, we start at our awa, we start at our whenua and our whare, with our ancestral connectedness. And so why we have such a strong determination to hold to these things, in spite of law breaking and so on, is the connection we have is vital to us and our identity. And it's our point of distinction for what we will have for ourselves in the future. So if that means we as we did after the Kaikoura earthquakes, Regan and I posed to the government that there should be an assessment done of all the marae. And why not get our people engaged in that process? That hasn't happened. That was in terms of the, you know, the new codes and building codes for our marae. These are the types of things that people will put to the government. Now, only 10 years later, we have the chance to revisit things that we've raised before. Health inequities, surgery for whānau. Why are we on the waiting list for so long? This should not delay our people's health if they had surgery or healthcare needs that are urgent. And so I think for health inequity, we must demand that we should not be left behind. What I found from previous situations, and even now we're starting to see it, is if we keep up our momentum and our strength, and it has to be bold, then it will be to stand on what we know is needed right now. Because if we can't make those gains now, they will get lost in the mix. And where those gains are going to come from is the whānau kōrero, and their absolute belief in that it is important to their well-being. And so if we don't have our whānau kōrero saying, this is what I need for us, my nanny needs an operation, my marae doors need fixing, my house is cold, we'll gather together all that kōrero so that they can still then look at the longer investment. Where is the sustainability that we can gather? And it's actually going to be amongst ourselves. Our own whakapapa and cultural connectedness is the social capital that is often talked about in at times post-disasters and natural disasters. This is important. We have it and we must protect it. Yeah.
And just following on, Maire, from your comments, a lot of what we also found was there is skills and abilities within the whānau that they may not be aware of. And these skills are often there, and you suddenly realise, well, we could do this, or we could do that. So there is this, for want of a better word, self-determination component that we do have already within our hand. And you need to sit down and see what those sorts of things are, what I call whānauisation, to see how you can actually not so much address the problem that's in front of you, but really change the problem and look at the skills and the abilities and access to resources that you have. Mindful that there will be some, like in the health, where you actually have to put your hand up. It was sad, not sad, that's not the right word, but in the Kaikoura situation where there was quite a lot of media about how resilient we were and how things were going on, that we were dealing with Maori families. We had one family, there were 3 families jammed into a 3-bedroom house. And there was something, I think 30 people all together living in this 3-bedroom house. And it was really the 3 dogs that was causing the real problem, I could see. But anyway, it was so, but they said, look, we're fine. There are other people worse off than us. And it's that sort of being able to sort of say, well, look, it's not okay to have 30 people living in a 3-bedroom house. We really need to give some priority to that sort of situation. So you need to be mindful of the resources that you have, but also this advocacy role. Never let that lose or to lose control of that in the coming recovery months, because this is where the hard yards are. Everyone talks about, and it's kind of sexy, talking about the response phase, and the media tends to disappear now. But this is where the hard yards are in the recovery and this, what I call reconstruction, where we try to get back to this, for want of a better word, Christchurch people, the new normal, about where and a large part of that's going to be this new cultural framework that we're going to realise that we actually have, which is kind of a light bulb moment, I guess, for many, but also potentially reconnect to one that's already inherent inside of you, which is kind of exciting.
Adrian, you've got a challenge here from Lynn, kia ora Lynn, about your statement regarding compliance. Yeah. And really, I guess, one of your comments there is, we should always continue to challenge the Crown in terms of their ability to determine what's best for us. And I guess that links into the different roles between kāwanatanga and rangatiratanga.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Russell. So look, so my statement really is around, the most important issue was to stop the virus. So I'm just simply saying to contain it. So I'm in a household right now that has 2.5 people in it. It's a Pākehā household. The Māori family below the deck, single floor, have 7 in the household. So, I'm just simply saying that if it had entered into and created more vectors Māori, if we carried on the traditional stuff, which is important, then it would have moved like wildfire within our communities really fast. So I want to acknowledge the bravery of our people in doing and taking care of that. We're now into another place. And Lynn's quite right. So, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but actually, one of the things around working in public health globally and watching how far it goes. And Regan, you see those outcomes as well. You know, if it had caught here, then it would have taken off. And I don't want to say, so one of the things about seasonal flus is actually the further away from the equator you get, the more it is like that. Whereas in the tropics, people move around all the time. So in winter, we tend to cluster together. And if you've got more moving parts, both in body mass and otherwise, well, then our families and the fact that our constructs bring us together, you're going to increase the opportunity for the contagion to take off. So that's not parkifying it. That's just really basic stuff. We're not that special. The special stuff is around we must address and attack those issues that have arrested our development and created inequities. That's a sub and silent issue. After we've got containment, that's all I'm saying. It would have increased exponentially and we would be having another conversation. And so whatever people's understanding of that it's contained was really, really important. I'm not talking about the political and intellectual ramifications. That you're absolutely right, saying stopping the contagion was the most important issue. Now, that's what this quarter was about, is God moving forward and what that might, and how that might present itself. We are the most dangerous vector group, not because we're Māori, but because we're Māori. You know, moving parts type, and all that represents. That's really, without trying to simplify it. And so, yeah, so now we move forward on those other things. So,
yeah, no, I agree with Adrian. I think there's, the call to battle happened during level 4, and it was a health disaster that we're looking at. But now coming out of level 4 into level 3, it's not, as Maire is saying, it's not a health disaster, it's a social network disaster. And that's the part that we need to be mindful of and address. And that's where I think you'll find these cultural nuggets exist. And that's something that we need to now activate and push for. And it should be included in any of the decision making going forward.
I guess there's a lot of illusion in some of the in some of the comments, really around. I guess this is an opportunity to really push systemic change, to really push for improved Crown Māori relationships, and the voices and the support and resourcing of Māori organisations in order to, I guess, make the change that we've always wanted. In terms of being, we've exhibited our rangatiratanga in terms of the response. How do we continue into that recovery environment and seek that? And I know one of the questions in here from Holly is around indigenising the Māori health workforce. And I think, it's in some ways, that's definitely a legitimate question, but I think part of it is how do we indigenize the systemic response by the health system to our needs? And you guys, who would like to take that one?
Shall I start off? Because it's quite common, this disasters are an opportunity discussion. And, we saw it in Christchurch, we saw it in Kaikoura, we see it all the time. And so I'm not surprised that many people are using the COVID-19 situation to drive, what is a lawful and justified agenda, but it may not be completely appropriate. Now, I know that's going to generate a whole lot of questions, but when you look back and we look at Christchurch, for instance, Christchurch was a great one. We were involved in the heating. If you remember back to the earthquake, and a lot of fireplaces got pulled out. So there was a strong push for heaters and heat pumps. So big push for heat pumps, which was there prior to the earthquake. And what happened was they blew up the power system, and we ended up using too much power. And then people found out that they were expensive, costly to run. So while, yes, it is that kind of opportunity, really for many of us, I think it's going to be a discovery that's going to be kind of a lot slower and something that we will come to identify personally. And from those personal reflections are going to develop a new cultural normal or an interpretation, or funny enough, discovering something that's inside of us that may not have been aware before. So I'm always cautious about using disasters as that opportunity, even though they are very lawful, not lawful, but they're very good objectives. For instance, I heard the other day about how clean the air is now with with no traffic. And while it would be nice to try and maintain that, it means a lot of people are going to have to be out of employment to actually do that. And so there's going to be that balancing will happen automatically. So I'm always kind of a little bit standoffish about disasters as being that opportunity. But there are things that will change, and we need to be mindful of those. They'll change more at a personal level, I suspect, and a whānau network level, and the other things that we should be looking out for.
Can I just very briefly say, look, Māori did something quite incredible. She created a Māori public health workforce. And so just as a brief synopsis of what indigenising the health workforce looks like. So the largest number of Māori taken on, apart from Māori nurses, was the increase of Māori mental health workers, which happened kind of 80s into the 90s. It was a huge build-up. So you had all these Māori health workers working in mental health places as well. And that's when we didn't have as many Māori providers. Then the next increase in Māori workforce in health was Māori health promoters. And then what happened is this last coalition was part of the disintegration, so I'm not attacking, of the public health units. And also what happened, a number of our people who were Māori health workers, Māori within that workforce, who were taken on the basis of recognised prior learning, and because they were part of their communities, the true gold was that they were part of their communities. Cleaners became, cooks became, significant parts in our communities, and were paid to do that. And then, of course, there was an increase of Māori providers as opposed to all DHB providers. So the good thing is, yes, it's been done before, and various things institutionally, which are the things that have arrested our development and have kept the inequity there, have actually ended up having many of those people not working in those positions, or it going out to under-resourced providers. So for every one of us that were working for a DHB, for 2 of us who went for a DHB, you could get 3 or 3.5 working for a Māori provider. So it's a perfect question, and actually there's a well-worn path, and it comes back to the things that have been alluded to by Maire, by Regan, by us here, is actually institutionally, we need to arrest those barriers, and at the same time, start to grow the stuff again at a family level, at a hapu level, and all those kind of things. That's where this true, and people are doing that in terms of iwi anyway, and iwi are collaborating at the same time. We're miles ahead of government. They can follow it up later on, but it's all happening.
Tim, I was just interested. Veronica's asked a very interesting question about where's this collaborative leadership of diversity of Māori likely to come from, and to change the systems. And what we see in disasters is that some people will step up, and there'll be people that shine out, and there'll be people that come forward, and you may not even know it, but that could be you. Now, so this leadership that we see coming out is asking those same questions that we've been talking about, and being aware of what are the needs within your whānau, and suddenly you discover that there is a bigger goal to it. So I still remember, I guess I'm allowed to mention it, at Kaikoura, a professor from Lincoln, a tourism professor, asked Henry Manawatu, what would Kaikoura be like without tourism? And we thought, oh, this is going to be an interesting question. Anyway, Henry's response was, a nice town. And it was kind of that kind of, suddenly we were all kind of laughing, but kind of it made sense that there, and I know I'm getting myself into trouble here with big industry and whale watch and things like that, but there are things inherent in Kaikoura that are there whether whale watch is there or not. And there are things inherent with our communities and the groups that we are involved with, whether, whatever that situation is. We've somehow got to discover those sorts of things. Out of that will come the leadership and the direction that we need to have going forward.
this might be one for you, Adrian. We've got Lynn again. Kia ora, Lynn. Interested in your views. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the Public Health Response Act, and just wondering what if you have a perspective on that, please.
Like everybody that reads lots of stuff like this, I tend to have a look at executive summaries and then kind of work out whether it's worth reading, really. Look, I just had a bit of a glance, and I'm not saying that I was particularly impressed, and I can't be quite specific about that. It was a bit like the mental health review. We could have written it before they started. And so it's what we would say, in health response, in health lingo, it's an unremarkable document. Is all I like to say in that sense. Can I just say 3 questions that might want to be asked also as kind of like in terms of reposition? I'm just taking some stuff that came from Canterbury University nearly a decade ago about what part do our people have in determining our own health needs and aspirations. That's ongoing. Another kind of one that's about reconfiguring, and that's what we're talking about now in whatever the new or old new looks like. And so, you know, has Māori responded to how has Māori responded and how we responded to health challenges over time, and what makes us slightly different. And another question would be, how might we rethink and reclaim and recover what is essential in terms of our Māoriness? So all of those things are questions, can I say, that have been asked over a decade ago in terms of Te Ao Māori from an academic and a whānau level.
We've got a comment here from Maria, and I'm kind of seeing a little bit of a recurring theme around her question is really about the design of contracts and how well they suit Māori providers and Māori organisations and Māori communities. But I guess those things can also be applied to the legislation comment that Adrian's just made, and to some of the structural arrangements. So would you like to respond to that, Maire?
Kia ora. I think that iwi become, as a collective, very important in this space. If there's one place that iwi have influence over their relationships in central government or with other key decision makers and funders, is for this type of thing. So for whānau to give their kōrero about, or providers or small groups that are looking at initiatives around what they'd like to do, they should have a good connection there somewhere. There should be a feedback loop between on the ground and with our iwi, because what we hoped was that the funder would understand. Now, we've seen, you know, since the 80s when NGOs first really started to become a part after the welfare system was split apart, and you could get a contract. HIV/AIDS was one of the first areas where an NGO was funded on a national basis to look at a campaign and prevention work. And then Māori providers followed, other NGOs followed with the health sector. What has tended to happen since then is that the agencies, the funding agents, say, sorry, this is the only way we can do it. It's got to be siloed, it's got to be clinical. And so we tried to negotiate positions and terms even for teams like Māori public health teams, Hauora Mātaurake, and it worked up to a point. And then when there's a change in government or a major policy change, reforms, health reforms, this breaks everything up. So what is important is to say, this is what we found, this is what the whānau said, that's how we're doing it. And it is a kind of a stalemate at points, but we need to come together. This is the thing when Regan asked us of us last week, when the government says we're all in this together, okay, at the moment, we're all in lockdown together, lovely. Now we're all out, we can hug each other. We're together on that. And we want to sort of create a better space and that's more, you know, huggy. But actually, when it comes down to it, we're not. Some are more in this than others. So I'd like to say that this is one of the key areas in terms of resourcing and pūtea for cultural recovery, that it should be top on the agenda of any emergency management planning, any civil defence planning, even any public health response act planning, just like as they did for the Sarah-led Act Ngāi Tahu as a key stakeholder in the legislation. So it was kind of opportunistic at the time, but the Māori Party fought for that, Rahui Kātene, and it was recognised because iwi, you know, we were quite powerful then. With all the economy being affected, iwi's influence hasn't changed just because the money base is shifting. Its influence is still there. So I hope that the National Iwi Chairs Forum, places like this, receive the type of support that allows them to really make a stand on behalf of this aspect of culture, of nature, of whānau, of whenua, and that right alongside all of this are other major things happening and that affect our world, climate change, that these are real for us. And in the Pacific, it's real. Now, right at the moment, nobody wants to hear about that. But when we talk whānau and whenua, moana, about our taonga in that respect, we're really upholding our mana and tino rangatiratanga. And our iwi cannot step away from the claims that are before the tribunals, health, housing, wahine Māori, oranga tamariki. You know, we've got to follow through on that, and I hope we can find a pūtea for our iwi to do that. Those who want to fight that fight but don't have the funds to do so.
Thank you, Maire. I'm going to take that as your closing comment there and open it up to the other two. I'm just mindful we've hit our 12 o'clock mark. So over to you, Regan, and then Adrian, and then I'll just...
Yeah, I wanted to, you know, just raise as a last thought, as a departing thought, some of the data that's come out of the Whānau Ora survey down in the South Island. And it's been very sobering looking at those numbers. So they've gone through, correct me if I'm wrong, Maire, 4,000 families, which represents around about 20,000 Māori in the South Island. So it's a goodly database. And from those numbers, they found that the biggest concern for Māori families was, 61% was getting food. Where was the next meal going to come from? 31% was how to pay the power bill, and 16% was connection to services. And what's interesting is that in the level 4, in that response phase, we hit that, Ngāi Tahu hit that food problem really hard. But as we go into level 2 and down into level 1, I think we've really got to shift to that power. Getting how do we pay the power bill, because the power keeps the fridge going, so we keep the food, and a whole lot of other issues. And we need to bring in the government part to then look at the social issues of that food, because they're incredible numbers to think that, and I can sort of vaguely remember, when I was young, that we, we were, kind of worried about food then, and I kind of know what that feeling is like. But 61% of Māori families, the biggest problem was where the next meal was going to come from. Yeah. That problem was tried to be addressed during the response phase, but during the response, during the recovery, we've now got to start looking at how to get that power bill sorted out, and how to get a solid foundation. I know that from this will come those, whānau connections, the linking together those networks. But if you ain't got power, you ain't got heat, you ain't got light, you ain't got a fridge, you can't charge your phone, certainly can't keep the computer going or anything else. So that was just a last comment about the sorts of things that for many of us, these are the numbers that we go to bed with. We wake up to every day and night trying to figure out what are we going to do, how are we going to attack it.
Whānau sovereignty, Whānau sovereignty is at the key to it all. No matter how big and flash we start to get as we grow, from essentially a nation within a nation of people who are financially illiterate to on paper, $50 billion economy, which is really 10 billion. What we're doing is we're growing our capacity, but it all comes down to the kind of things that have been alluded to today around whānau sovereignty, and all the other stuff packs around to reinforce it. And so part of that whānau sovereignty is arresting the barriers. And so that gives us the opportunity. And we can still be former slaves enraged by our previous servitude. That's what happens when you've been colonised. I also want to say we're a magnificent place, and we're a magnificent people. We have more executive influence than any other Indigenous people on the planet. And I'm not saying we should be grateful for that. We do, at both local and central government position we have. And Little Rock is another example of how much mighty nations and nations within nations. So we're setting the template for that, but ultimately it comes back to whānau sovereignty, hapu, iwi, and all of those things, so that whatever the title, whatever the moniker of anyone who represents iwi, whether it's the Iwi Leaders Forum or whether it's at Del Māori Council, whatever it is, that there's this unanimity that comes back to the single most important place for that is around it. And of course, many of us are experiencing that in terms of the Zoom has just been helping our families get rid of some of the, some of the rarurara and the ngangara that's within to come together in that place of adversity. And so it's already starting. And that's one of the great things that's coming out of it. So there's another chance for us to look back within either individually or within families. And those are the greatest things. And that's the greatest gift that we have to government. And so as we run towards yet another election, so making sure that those issues are right at the front, coming back to that single most important, as Pākehā people say, the most significant sociological unit is the fact. We know that, that's nothing we don't know. So there it comes back into those kind of things. And keep having these conversations, and then creating the template for fellow New Zealanders who have yet to realise some of those things.
Kia ora, Adrian. Kia ora koutou katoa. I guess one of the things that's kind of been marked for me in reflection of your kōrero has been that government has managed to find beds for women who need services from Women's Refuge. They've managed to find beds for people who are homeless during the lockdown. And I guess the challenge is, how do we ensure that the government continues to support those most vulnerable in our communities? I think, we didn't even really touch on things like the digital divide that has been really evident. And so while some of us are able to Zoom and join webinars, there's a whole bunch of stressed out kids and parents trying to operate on minimal data with their cell phones across a household of 10. I think there's been some challenges and suggestions from our attendees around needing to look for kōtahitanga across iwi, across Māori community organisations, across whānau, across marae and hapu, and working together. So I'd like to encourage all our attendees to post any questions or pārtai for Adrian, Regan and Maire on our Community Research Facebook discussion group, and they'll get on in the next few days to respond. And I'd like to mihi again to all our presenters for sharing their wero, whakaaro and inspiration with us today. We've got both challenges and opportunities to reimagine and build the communities and nation that will support future generations to thrive and reach their potential. If you'd like to be notified when we're broadcasting our next webinar in June, which is likely to be focused on more stories from our community organisations and their response and impact related to COVID-19, please join our Facebook page and discussion group. Again, you can also subscribe to our monthly e-news by emailing communications@communityresearch.org.nz. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. A video copy of the webinar with Adrian, Maire and Regan will be uploaded to share with colleagues and friends later this week. I'd also like to thank Dan, our techie, and the team sitting behind the scenes in our office at Community Research for their help. Mauri ora, kia koutou katoa.
The Community Research website offers a hub for good community research and researchers. It's the place for the public to find and share evidence about effective community practices. The website collects research and evidence and organises these so that they can be easily accessed and used by other groups. You can access this research and browse by category, by a list of quick-link topics, or by searching for something specific. All of the research is free to download. The Community Research site is all about excellence and effective practices. You can view recordings of past webinars and find out about future ones. The webinars share evidence about what's working in the community sector. Published by Community Research in 2007, the Code of Practice provides the standards and guidelines for doing research. It's the place to start if you're thinking of undertaking research with or in a community or iwi. As well as the collection of research, we keep a register of experienced researchers who are skilled at working with iwi and communities. To find a researcher who can help you, we have a filter system which allows you to find people based on location, qualification, ethnic group, and area of expertise. The Community Research website is a unique resource for the community sector to use and share. It matters because communities who learn well will do well. It matters because it evidences what's working for us. For researchers and community people alike, we've made it as easy as possible to share your research on our website. Kaua e whakamā. Uploading material is quick and simple. Save your work as a PDF and head over to Share Research. Answer a few questions that help us tag and organize the research so it's easy for people to find. If you're a researcher and skilled at working with communities, you can add your details to the directory of researchers so that you can be found. Community research keeps you updated and informed. This helps make you more effective. If you want to stay updated about the latest research, informed about new resources and our upcoming webinars, head over to sign up for our e-news on the homepage. Community research is a rich resource built for and by the community. For it to reach maximum potential, we rely on you to contribute, participate, and support the resource to grow and thrive. Mā te kotahitanga e ora ai tātou.